So, hello, yes, welcome to Cinema Eclectica. We are part of the Geek Show podcast network, and yeah, hi, you're quite right. We are the Geek Show's dedicated movie podcast. I'm Graham, and this week I've been joined by Tim.
Hello!
And Rob.
Dedicated is the word, yes.
Yes. Committed.
Usually that dedication comes in the form of me subjecting myself to horrible rubbish, but this week, it's a treat.
Yes, that's very true.
A good thing for a change.
I'm still not sure about films, to tell you the truth. My mind isn't made up about films.
Yeah.
Overall, cinema as a medium, is pretty good. It's got its moments.
Don't get me wrong. I don't think it'll last, but still.
Yeah.
Needs more Turkish incest movies about diamonds that make people burn for some reason.
What the hell are you talking about?
That was last week.
Right, okay, sure.
Except it wasn't last week, was it? It was 2 weeks ago.
Oh, time is circular. It doesn't mean anything anymore, Graham. You know this as well as I do.
Yes.
It's quarantine time. Quarantine time is special time.
Yes, very true. This week we decided to do one of our director's lottery features where we pick a director from our master list at random and we choose a film by them. And last time we chose, it came out as Wes Craven, and we went for The People Under the Stairs.
Because Wes Craven, of course, very well known as a maker of slasher movies. Kind of classics.
Nightmare on Elm Street,
Yeah.
Scream, The Last House on the Left. That's his beat.
But this one, perhaps slightly less well known, and not really slasher movie, or not exactly.
I mean, we're all vaguely of the same age, aren't we? So, Scream was major news,
Yeah.
And that, for me, that was my introduction to him. It was one of those films that everybody's seen, everybody wants to see. And I'll be honest, I didn't really get it at the time because it was playing off these horror tropes that I hadn't quite experienced yet.
Yeah.
But later on,
I kind of had the same reaction, and I'd never come across this People Under the Stairs movie at all until this week, so...
Well, I said last week I had a slightly unfair characterisation of his career, which is that he worked his way up the ranks until he did Nightmare on Elm Street, which was a massive, massive hit. And then he couldn't follow it up and went off the radar for a bit until he came back with Scream. But in fact, that's not true. I found out while doing my due diligence for this podcast. Don't expect too much from that, by the way. I literally only found out this one fact. That The People Under the Stairs was actually quite a big hit when it came out. But despite that, it always seems to get mentioned by Craven fans as a good deep cut,
Which is unfair in the movie, but his career is kind of like very typical of... They call them the masters of horror, so like John Carpenter, people like that.
Yeah.
They'll have incredible highs and then sort of middles, I guess is the best way to say it. They were either terrible or went under the radar entirely or struggled for money, and that was a big part of Wes Craven's career. He just struggled to get enough money to make these things, despite having a track record with this, with Scream, with Nightmare on Elm Street, which just made holy hell type levels of money.
It was a sensation. Yeah, even before I was interested in films at all, I was petrified of Freddy Krueger because you saw that image everywhere.
I have a similar relationship with Hellraiser. I saw a standee in a local video shop and it scared the hell out of me. It was like Pinhead who towered over me, and I've never been able to get past that. I've never seen Hellraiser because the video shop experiences are real,
Yeah, completely. Other things I remember being scary from my childhood include the poster for Driller Killer and Virginia Bottomley.
Yeah.
That's a skew.
But yeah, The People Under the Stairs, to set it up, is set in a working class black district of LA. It stars a kid. Its central character is a kid who's nicknamed Fool. Partly because his real name is Poindexter, so Fool is actually slightly less of an insult. But his family are about to get evicted by a group of slum landlords called the Robersons, who bought up every house on their block. So he teams up with a friend of his family called Leroy, played by a pre-Pulp Fiction Ving Rhames. And they decide to break into the Robersons' house, having heard a rumour that they have gold coins that could probably, buy their house outright and see off this threat to their property. What they don't reckon with is that the house, which, like all American houses in movies, has like massive crawl spaces in between the interior and exterior walls, which seems kind of wasteful to me, but hey, what do I know about building? Is also full of the Robesons' children who were kept in the basement and fed on human flesh.
Yeah, it's an odd movie.
It's an odd film.
It goes further than that. The Robersons themselves are a couple of inbred maniacs.
Yes.
And
played by Big Ed and Nadine from Twin Peaks.
Yeah, I thought we were going to get into that.
It doesn't feel that out of character, to be honest.
No.
And to go even further, the house itself is also a prison for these kids, filled with bizarre mechanical traps.
Yes.
So there are lots of electric fences and windows and doors, sort of sliding staircases and things like that, controlled by switches.
Yeah.
And out of this, you get something that, again, you kind of call a horror film, and I went into it expecting it to be a much more conventional horror film than it actually is. It partly because of the fact that it has a child main character.
Yeah.
And it's like, how brutally are they prepared to kill this kid? And I sort of thought, surely they can't be going to... They had a couple of kids, main characters, in fact, at age like 12 or whatever. And it's like...
Yeah.
Isn't it one of those kind of things where it's sort of the third rail you don't touch? I mean, killing a kid would be something considered far more,
Oh, well, you've seen.
What's the word?
There's many horror movies that have killed kids. This wouldn't be the first.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about that in the context of Craven's work, because one of his first films that picked up a cult following was The Hills Have Eyes, which has a scene where the monsters in it kidnap a baby. And it is sort of... It's an odd moment, because it's one of the moments that has made The Hills Have Eyes kind of legendary as a really harsh horror film, but it also kind of unbalances the film. It stops working after that because you can see Craven trying to kind of walk that one back a bit and make sure that the baby isn't in too much danger. The thing that I kept thinking with The People Under the Stairs is that I can imagine an alternate version of this which is less gory and has less swearing, which would probably be a pretty good kind of kids' horror movie.
I think it still functions as one anyway, to be honest, because it's a tonal exercise which kind of darts all over the map, really. It's incredibly slapstick. It's also got... It touches upon social issues about... trickle-down economics and how certain people own certain land and the way they treat their tenants and stuff like this. Which is kind of like the idea of the upper classes subjugating their tenants. Is not a new concept by any means, but it's one that's done here. But also, it's got a bit of context given to it by the documentary from, what was it, last year or the year before, Horror Noir?
Oh, yes, yeah.
This is... basically one of the major texts for black horror.
Yeah.
Because 1991, one like to make any generalisations about the state of horror, even if this isn't really one, back then. But your black characters there, at the term they used in the documentary Horror Noir is sacrificial black men, or black women, where they just die for the betterment of the white lead characters. Or the one character who dies at the end, as in the horror trope. So to have this kid, Brandon Quinton Adams, be the hero, and he is a total hero. It's a major title for black horror and the black horror fans.
And the kid Fool himself was a great character, I thought, and in a sense it was kind of... It's the sort of thing where they could have had some kid actor in that who completely screwed it up and was unable to carry the movie, but he pretty much does.
Yeah, he is really good.
But it's also, like we're saying, it's weird. It's like a kind of slasher horror sort of premise that overlaps partly with almost like a kind of kids adventure premise where there's like a spooky house they have to go into.
Yeah, yeah.
And it also has some other characteristics where it's not quite a pure sort of survival horror movie in the sense that they just get locked in the house and have to get out. They do actually kind of escape and then go back. They sort of go on the offensive a bit.
Yeah,
the victims do. Yeah. I mean, talking about the politics of it, I'll say, yeah, that part sort of surprised me as well. It is, for like an American horror movie, surprisingly kind of Marxist in its sympathies.
Yeah, it's venomously anti-landlord.
Yeah. Almost so kind of Sledgehammer in that respect, really.
The thing I found about it tonally is I'd heard it described as a horror comedy, and although I didn't find it particularly funny, it almost didn't matter. It's one of those horror comedies which isn't hilarious, but it's fun. And it's got so much energy to it that kind of creates the same vibe.
On that though, I wouldn't call The Evil Dead a comedy. I wouldn't call Brain Dead a comedy. It's the way they react to violence, really, isn't it? That there's violence, and then there's over the top violence where it becomes silly, and that's the space which they operate on. And I think People Under the Stairs is exactly in that. It's not funny, but it's really over the top.
But on the other hand, I'm not sure they pinned down. I'm not sure he pinned down that sort of tone exactly all the time. I mean, it's kind of, there's elements of this, like the kind of mechanisms that keep the the kids locked up in the cellar, and it made me think this is a kind of ancestor of the sort of torture horror movies you get like Saw now, only it's less it's less sadistic probably, and it's kind of more interested in the weirdness.
It doesn't have that kind of hopeless feel that the noughties torture cycle had, which for me was the thing that didn't make it work. It's by about the half-hour mark in each, say, Hostel film, you are presented with a situation which is as bad as anything you can imagine and no escape. And you just think, oh, right, we're just sort of sat here for the next 45 minutes, aren't we?
Yeah. But it's, on the other hand, the tone very occasionally went very slightly too far, like the moment with the electrified door handle. Where it's the case where they're being chased by a vicious attack dog. So one character grabs hold of the electric fence, in effect, or the electric door, and then grabs hold of another character's hand, and that's the character being bitten by the dog, and the electricity zaps through, like sort of Wile E. Coyote moment, where they transmit the electricity through to the dog, and it zaps the dog.
Yeah.
And I thought that was like weirdly much more cartoony than most of the rest of the movie. But then there were other elements. I kind of, as an extension of that idea about saying, thinking, can you suspend disbelief about them not being willing to kill the kid or not that brutally? The one element that I felt could have done with being cut from it was all of the gunfire, because they have an incredible amount of guns being fired.
Yeah.
And the daddy character is constantly hunting the kids around the house with a gun and firing off the shotgun. He has a machine gun as well at one point, doesn't he, I think?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, they keep firing the gun as his weapon, and after a while it kind of seemed obvious they weren't actually just going to shoot the kids dead.
Oh, right, yeah, I don't know. I think the house setting gives them enough places to, like, hide or duck out of the way to make that plausible. I think, in tonal terms, my only problem with it, and it pains me to say this because, of course, I love the guy, how could I not, but Everett McGill's performance is, I think, far too broad even for a movie like this, and keeps going into this weird sort of kind of brain voice, which is really not effective or good.
Yeah, I mean,
I think that might come from like familiarity with him, because I personally didn't find that to be the case. I didn't notice that sort of thing.
Yeah, maybe.
But I've not seen as much of his work as you have, so maybe you're more familiar with his ins and outs than I am.
I didn't view it.
Could be.
I didn't view it as a bad thing exactly, but on the other hand, I thought that Wendy Roby, is it, as Mommy, was much more kind of interesting as a bizarre maniac, really.
Yeah. No, she's fantastic.
Yeah.
The genuine evil presence that she
Yeah.
is in this. Yeah.
So it's
'Cause I never felt like it was. In certain movies you think, oh, they're not going to kill the kid. It's the hero. He's a kid. It's fine. They're not. He's kind of like untouchable. But I never felt that was the case here.
oh really? Okay.
It never has a moment really where it doesn't feel like the kid is in serious trouble.
You mean isn't? Sorry.
He's always in trouble. There's
Oh, I see
never a
what you
moment
mean.
when you think, oh, he's going
Well-
to get away scot-free. He's fine. Because the way it's all set up.
It just about hovered on the borderline there. I just about managed with that kind of thinking, well, I always sort of believed he was in trouble in a way, but on the other hand, after a certain amount of this dashing around, I did kind of start to think, well, there were a lot of, there were some hazards where they just weren't going to do anything that brutal or vicious to him, partly just because they sort of run out of characters, really. It wasn't the kind of movie where there were, 6 kids and they were going to kill off 4 of them before you got to the end, but...
Yeah, I suppose maybe what they're on the border of here and what we've kind of identified in our different ways is that it is very hard to have villains who are both threatening and dumb.
Yeah.
It's like, if they're too dumb, they're not a threat. If they're too threatening, then they're... And I think it mostly balances that out here.
I wouldn't say dumb so much as clumsy.
Yeah.
There's a space between those, which I think these characters, his character operates in.
I thought it worked pretty well, kind of symmetrically, really, which is that you had Fool and the girl whose name I've temporarily forgotten.
Oh, yes, the girl who is called Alice.
Yeah, you had Fool and Alice, basically, as the kind of ones being relatively mature and making sensible decisions, and then you had the 2 adults as the ones behaving like, childish sort of toddlers, really, thrashing around and throwing tantrums.
Which I think is part of the sort of weirdly childlike, and I say childlike as a positive thing rather than childish. The childlike vibe of it is that it is very invested in that idea of the children having a wisdom that the adults don't.
Yeah.
It was very common in that sort of era of movies, though, wasn't it, to be fair? It's sort of playing off the Amblin style of movie, but with a bit more teeth.
Well, it came out, I think, it must have been about a year or so after Home Alone, which casts the whole thing in a very different light, I think.
Yeah.
And there was also that one that I think I did on the Christmas episode, the Pen Wall one, where a kid is basically trapped in... It's basically Home Alone, but French, and with guns.
What do they call that in English? It's Dial Code Santa Claus?
Yeah, that's the one, yeah. There's too many titles, so it's hard to remember which is which. But yeah, there's like a set formula for these things. And I think, genuinely speaking, when you're talking about Wes Craven's sense of humour, it doesn't really have a lot of movies where he can play it. It's either... the meta stuff, which became kind of a parody of itself eventually.
Yeah.
Or I guess even Nightmare on Elm Street has a sense of that about it too.
Last House on the Left has a kind of a sense of humour, and boy, was that ever a mistake.
But I can't comment on that. But in the other ones, Wes Craven's just a big old goofball, isn't he?
He is, yeah. He was a kind of a cuddly guy, I always felt. I know we often talk about horror directors being secretly just the loveliest people, but he seems like a particularly extreme example of that.
I think they're all sort of counteracting John Carpenter, because John Carpenter's just a miserable bugger. So they're all sort of counterbalancing his cynicism. And his,
you do kind of get the... You get the funny effect from that, which is that, People Under the Stairs is halfway between being a brutal torture slasher horror movie and being like a, admittedly, kind of slightly dark children's adventure movie.
Yeah.
Which includes some very, very silly kind of haunted house stuff. It gets to the point where they've got like the white skeleton hanging off the chains on the wall,
Yes.
And
that's wonderful, because it is such an old ghost train kind of prop, but weirdly it kind of works.
Yeah. You've also got the ghoul's arms bursting through the walls. That's the other one, where the planks of the wall suddenly burst out and there's hands grabbing you.
Yeah.
And they do end up blowing up the house or part of the house with dynamite.
Yes, it's proper Looney Tunes stuff.
This is one of my this type of movie is one of my soft spots for horror. Really, it's gateway horror. Because honestly, I think this might have been one of the last ones before horror decided to take itself all serious and decided that kids can't have horror movies or horror shows too. So like the era of like Eerie Indiana and all sorts of things.
Gremlins and stuff like that.
This is very, very much within that wheelhouse.
It has the virtue, really, of...
I think I might be giving it an easier ride, yeah.
As opposed to, like, long-running franchise horror series like Scream or Nightmare on Elm Street, where it's like, it becomes increasingly more of a parody with every subsequent installment.
Oh, yeah.
To the point where basically you're just getting the jokes. And People Under the Stairs pretty much just kind of did the whole tone of the series there together in one movie, you know.
That's a good point.
Yeah, it's just four compressed installments from a horror franchise. So it's got the point where it's Looney Tunes slapstick, and it's also got some quite nasty bits, actually.
Yeah. No, that feels like a good point to leave off on. That's a very good point.
So if you're a fan of horror, it's definitely one we'd recommend checking out if you haven't already.
Yes, I enjoyed it tremendously.
Yeah.
Have you got any recommendations to go with that? Because I've got like one which is almost perfect, I think.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. Go on.
Quite simply, Attack the Block. Because both.
Of course.
Good pick. Yeah.
Both are about things that seem to be very much about black inner city communities, but both speak way broader and louder than that rather reductive brush implies. And they're both super fun.
Yeah.
And it make an amazing double bill. Like the best time, those two back to back.
No, I can't beat that. I think that's a terrific suggestion. I kept thinking when it was in its very early stages and you were just watching kind of life in this neighbourhood go by, I kept thinking about how well it does that kind of neo-realist thing while it's setting up the horror. And I was thinking about the first time I watched They Live by John Carpenter. I kept thinking someone could come across this on late night television, watch the first sort of 20 minutes and think it was an actual serious social realist drama about unemployment in Reagan's America, until suddenly it takes this astonishing twist. And I think they both have that vibe that in making political horror movies, they actually take the normality that most horror films just use as basic setup and deal with it very seriously and give it a lot of character and depth.
And more political horror movies could do with sequences with dogs chasing kids down slides.
This is also true, yes.
Bit of a levity for the whole genre that it create.
I'd also like to throw in actually a quick reference while I think on for a film I reviewed on our Black Horror special last year, Cosmic Slop, which was a HBO anthology film that was designed to be a kind of Black Tales from the Crypt produced by Reginald D. Hudlin. And it didn't get picked up, but the three sort of shorts that were made as a kind of proof of concept got circulated as a feature, and it's floating around online now, and it really is quite fantastic. And a lot of the early interior stuff, when you're in Fool's house and you see how kind of run down and overcrowded his apartment block is very much like the Chester Himes adaptation that closes out Cosmic Slop. It's just part of a kind of early 90s zeitgeist, I think. But that was our last Director's Lottery. Shall we pick our next one? We have on the list at the moment 277 names.
277. Right. So random number generator selects number 182. That's 182.
182 brings us out with another very interesting horror choice, Georges Franju.
Who I know nothing whatever about.
Georges Franju is probably most famous for Eyes Without a Face, the legendarily a bit much for its time French horror movie.
A bit much for now, that sequence.
Yes.
Blimey.
Yes, very nasty surgical horror in it.
Oh, right, okay.
He's done quite a lot of things. He's done some things that are more down to earth, but he's also done... Didn't he do Spotlight on a Murderer as well?
He did, yes, and that's a weird movie.
That's a great film, yeah.
It's a murder mystery with zero mystery.
Yeah, it's a locked room mystery which is solved right as the credits go, and then you just watch people slowly drive themselves mad trying to solve this insoluble crime. Late in his career, he made some tributes to the silent era serials of Louis Feuillade, one of which, Judex, was a remake of an old silent serial by Feuillade, and one of which, Shadow Man, was a new film done in its style. So there's a lot of things. I would love to do Shadow Man. I think that's such an underrated movie. But yeah, we'll see.
Well, it'll be an education for me because I know next to nothing about him really. So
yeah,
I'll be happy to find and watch whatever it is that we pick. Yeah, Shadow Man. You think?
Just on the topic of Eyes Out of Face, it is incredibly grim in that one sequence, but also really ethereal and quite dreamlike. It's such an odd thing. So don't let that one scene put you off like a legitimate horror classic.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic.
Hey everybody, this is Quentin Flynn and you are tuned in to The Geek Show. It rocks. You roll. Got it memorized?
Patreon. We all like it. For most of us in this economic hellscape, it's our only source of income, which is why The Geek Show has a Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show, where you can give us lovely money to keep making these. Failing that, we'd be perfectly content for you to just leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. It does help with analytics and algorithms and other things that I don't actually understand. If you want to be kept up to date on all the new Geek Show stuff, you can find us at TGS_The Geek Show on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
Unsure if your Spider-Man is amazing or spectacular? Infinitely confused by Crisis on Infinite Earths? Or does the mere thought of X-Men continuity make you tremble? Then 4Panel is the podcast for you. Join me, Andrew, and my co-host Robin Mick as we guide you through the weird and wild world of comics. We'll talk about the secret origins of your favourite characters, delve into the craziest events of comics past, and review the hottest new graphic novels that you might have missed. That's 4Panel, a part of the Geek Show Podcast Network, available wherever podcasts are found.
If you go to thegeekshow.co.uk, which has just been redesigned, and I mean, look at it, it's gorgeous, isn't it, Rob?
It is, and it didn't make me pull all my hair out designing it and getting the right plugins and all of that to look just how I wanted it to. I've totally got a full head of hair right now.
Yes.
Totally worth it, though, because if you do go to thegeekshow.co.uk, you will find my review of the new second run title, Checkmate in Search of Jimmy Menzel. Now, I happen to think that if someone, like me, is going to spend 7.5 hours of their life watching a documentary about Czech New Wave cinema, the least you can do, guys, is spend 7.5 hours of your life reading the review. That's how it works.
Makes sense to me.
I've got to say, I'm pretty sure Second Run are just pandering to you at this point.
Yes. Yeah, 7.5 hour documentary about Czech cinema does have a target market of, let me just look up the analytics, me. So, Tim.
Yes, hello.
This is probably a weirdly specific question, but the Beast, right?
Yeah, the Beast.
Must it die?
Yeah, interestingly, my discovery recently is that, yes, the Beast must die, which is a conclusion I reached after watching the 1974 British horror film The Beast Must Die. Exclamation mark.
Excellent.
Yeah, which is an Amicus horror movie directed by Paul Annett from 1974, and is not terribly well known, I don't think. It hadn't really come on my radar before. It's adapted from a short story by James Blish, and it's a weird little kind of gem among Amicus Horror's kind of anthology films. Paul Annett himself is not an especially well-known director. I mean, he's a TV director, really. I think this might be his only feature film, in fact.
Okay.
Yeah. And it is a movie that has such a bizarre premise. It's kind of almost difficult to explain it to people. It's a werewolf-themed whodunit, which is that it's a kind of combination whodunit and werewolf monster horror movie. There's other weird stuff going on as well. But the idea is more or less that you could have something rather like John Carpenter's The Thing from this, where you've got a small group of people isolated and you don't know which of them is the werewolf. Someone could suddenly turn into the werewolf and start killing the others. But that's not really what they're doing. They're merging it with a kind of Agatha Christie-style mystery whodunit set in a country house.
Yes.
Yeah, to the extent to which The Beast Must Die begins with a challenge to the viewers saying, one of these people is a werewolf, see if you can work out which one. And then it breaks before the ending for a brief interval in which you are challenged again and told that you have, in vintage mystery style, all the clues you now need to work out who is the werewolf. And then you get the ending with the werewolf's identity. Right.
The question that I have to ask at this juncture is, did you guess the werewolf's identity?
I kind of did, yeah, partially. How easy people will find it, I don't know. It might depend on your kind of knowledge of these kind of movies and the actors in it as well. It's got a surprisingly good cast, considering how completely bananas the actual premise of the movie is. The main character is played by Calvin Lockhart, who plays a millionaire who's kind of invited all these possible werewolves to spend the weekend at his country mansion. We got Charles Gray as one of his guests. Everyone enjoys Charles Gray, right?
Absolutely, yes.
You got a quite early performance from Michael Gambon, looking extremely 70s with a kind of moustache and mullet sort of look. And you have Peter Cushing playing a kind of, werewolf expert, archaeologist and anthropologist who has, in order to deliver, with authority, some of the most ludicrous lines explaining how werewolfism works and that kind of thing. Describing how silver molecules in the blood cause allergic reactions or something, and how the wolfsbane flower prevents the process of pollen in the air that can affect werewolves or something like that. But it's
right.
I mean, it has to be said, it's one of those ones where if that idea of a extremely kind of 70s werewolf themed whodunit doesn't immediately appeal to you, I'm not sure how I'm going to be able to persuade you about this. It's a surprisingly lean 90 minutes, and it rather neatly structures itself with the 3 nights of the full moon, of saying that essentially as they stay there, the werewolf will emerge each night, and the main character, the millionaire, is a kind of mad hunter who's hunted every animal on the face of the earth. He's killed every other species and now wants to hunt the werewolf, and so has invited these people, knowing that one of them probably will turn into a werewolf on each night of the weekend, and he will hunt them with a high-powered rifle. And then it's got the kind of the trappings of sort of mad electronic 70s stuff that got popular, rather like in some of the later Hammer Dracula films. So there's kind of surveillance equipment like, TV screens and cameras set up everywhere. Kind of like closed-circuit surveillance and mad electric tripwires and that kind of thing, and infrared lights. So I
am a big fan of that.
Yeah. Yes. So it's definitely something where there's almost no way you could make a parody of it that would be any sillier, really, than the actual thing. And yet, I have to admit to thinking it works surprisingly well. It's partly the merit of it being that they do more or less take this absolutely seriously and think it could work. It drives. There's not really much in the way of just kind of looking and winking at the camera. It's it takes the idea of the werewolf hunt pretty seriously. They provide scientific explanations for what werewolves are. There's a lot of discussion of werewolves and how it combines all of the mythology with all of the crazy sort of fringe science.
Yeah.
And provides a legit kind of murder mystery, I suppose. Whether you could say it has any really first-rate kind of horror sequences, I'm not sure. I mean, you have a bit of a problem with the werewolf that it's quite a difficult monster to kind of realise, because you can put together a very, very elaborate kind of special effects transformation scene, and maybe that got easier and easier in the 80s. But at this point, not only do you not do that because it gives away who the werewolf is, but also they probably didn't have these special effects to do it, and you end up with the effect where either the werewolf is just played by a human who's been covered in fake hair, or something like that.
Yes.
Or the werewolf is just played by a dog that's jumping up at people in an extremely friendly way, and they're trying to add sound effects to make it sound like it's evil. But it has a lot of kind of odd bits of tone. It has a bizarre car chase where Michael Gambon tries to escape from the house for the weekend, and they chase after him for no reason at all, and they sort of drive around a quarry sort of area and then come back, and it contributes nothing. Likewise, the movie starts with Calvin Lockhart seemingly being hunted by a gang of sort of villainous goons with rifles, and it turns out that's gradually revealed when he kind of stumbles out onto the lawn where everyone else is having a tea party, that all of that was just like a test of the security system, and that's the beginning of the movie, and it realised that he is actually the employer of everybody and the owner of the house. So
that thing with the car chase, is that, as somebody who isn't an expert on the genre, is that a thing in like film versions of Country House Mysteries? Because I remember being quite surprised when one turned up in Knives Out.
Well, I don't think it is especially a thing, particularly. I don't know. It seemed kind of slightly out of place here. I'm not sure why they put it in, except possibly just to inject some action, thinking that possibly being paranoid that the audience would be getting bored, which seems to me an unjustified fear, really. But they have a limited number of silver bullets in it loaded into a gun, one which will kill the werewolf. They have people eating them or something, swallowing silver bullets. Yeah.
Okay.
And you have bizarre crimes that all of the characters are supposedly responsible for. Like one of them was one of the guests at the party was a cannibal of some kind. And it's like, yeah, is involved in eating human flesh, supposedly. And it's like, does this mean he's a werewolf? Well, probably not. He seems strangely kind of ashamed of this, really. The fact that he's been, revealed the only slightly lesser crime of cannibalism. Is that worse than being a werewolf or better than being a werewolf? But I don't know. And it again comes to a kind of a pretty kind of dark and bizarre sort of ending, really. It all comes to quite a tragic end once you realise who the werewolf is, and an amazing number of people get killed who aren't the werewolf as well. If you do guess it perfectly, you'll have done better than I did. And I don't know if there's very much more to say about it than that. It's a 1974 horror film that combines whodunit with a werewolf movie. And actually, the werewolf is not an especially kind of well-treated monster in the history of horror movies. There's far fewer werewolf movies than there are, vampires and various other types.
Yeah, there's certainly fewer great ones, isn't there? There was that blip of really fantastic werewolf movies in the early 80s, but they've sat on the sidelines for a lot of the rest of horror history. Yeah,
just a kind of sort of rarer species, I don't know. But this movie also has, it's got Valentine Dial doing voiceover at the start.
The Man in Black.
Yes. Aside from that, I don't know. I mean, in a way, it's got Peter Cushing and not putting him to terribly good use in a way, which is he probably has about 4 lines of dialogue in the whole movie, because it's a pretty short movie and with a kind of ensemble cast. So it's sort of like, could you say that they make good use of Peter Cushing? Probably not, but on the other hand, it's still kind of impressive that they've got him, considering how daft the whole thing is. And that's all I've got to say about it, really. That's The Beast Must Die, directed by Paul Allett, which is out now on Blu-ray.
Yes, this is on Indicator, I believe. Yeah.
One werewolf movie that doesn't get enough credit, I think. Not that I'm recommending it as part of this review or anything. It just made me think when you were talking about the sort of the mystery aspect of it. It was from the 80s called Wolfen.
Oh yeah, which I've never seen.
It's got the Predator effect. It's got the Predator effect, which Predator totally stole. Like,
Oh, right.
totally
Right.
hook, line, and sinker. They stole it from Wolfen.
What, the sort of the thermal imaging vision, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not really werewolves either. They're more sort of like, if you don't know your Native American folklore, which I think is about me and 6 other people outside of Native Americans, the skinwalkers. So,
Oh, yeah.
Oh yes, yeah.
which is really, really interesting take.
There's a fascinating canon of not quite werewolf movies, aren't there? Like Cat People and all the various versions of that, and yes, Skinwalker based stuff as well.
If you want a recent comparison, which is right on the fringe of what you would consider a werewolf movie, you can watch Werewolf from last year or the year before that we reviewed in the show, didn't we, Graham?
Oh yes, yeah.
Which is about like World War II death camp survivors coming up against feral dogs. And it's like, well, those aren't werewolves. The characters discuss the possible belief that they're werewolves, the kind of myth that they are. And the movie's called Werewolf, but that's about the limit of it.
That's really unfair to werewolf fans because they're so starved for good movies. You can't just go around
I
throwing the
know.
title around like it's it's bad stuff.
But it's quite from the, in terms of, seriously getting to grips with the werewolf idea, it's from the very realist kind of end, about as realist as you can do while still having that in there. And then there's The Beast Must Die, which really goes quite far out in the other direction.
Right, well, that's about your lot from this week. Next week, we are going to do a big Netflix release that was scheduled to come out next week, and then they moved it back to this week. And then I thought, well, bugger you, Netflix, we're still doing it this week anyway. Which is Gina Price by the Woods, The Old Guard, a comics adaptation with Charlize Theron, Matthias Schoenaerts, and Kiki Lane. But until then, that's been your lot from Cinema Eclectica. I've been Graham.
I've been Tim.
And I've been Rob.
See you next week.